The world awoke on February 28, 2026, to the grim reality of a new and profoundly dangerous conflict erupting in the Middle East. This was not a distant skirmish or a proxy battle fought in the shadows. This was direct, overt warfare. A barrage of missiles and a series of devastating airstrikes illuminated the pre-dawn skies, signaling a violent escalation involving three powerful nations: the Islamic Republic of Iran, the State of Israel, the United States of America. The suddenness of the events sent ripples of fear and uncertainty across the globe, as international leaders scrambled to respond and populations watched with bated breath. The initial reports, filled with details of explosions and military mobilizations, confirmed that a long-feared scenario had finally come to pass, pushing the region and the world toward an unpredictable precipice. The facts on the ground painted a stark and alarming picture of a conflict moving with terrifying speed. The roots of this open warfare stretch back through years of simmering tension primarily centered on Iran's controversial nuclear program. For over a decade, the United States voiced deep concerns. Israel voiced deep concerns. Other global powers voiced deep concerns. They feared Iran's uranium enrichment was a precursor to a nuclear weapon. Iran has consistently maintained its program is for peaceful energy purposes, a right it claims under international treaties. This fundamental disagreement fueled sanctions, covert actions, fraught negotiations. In the weeks leading up to the conflict, a final, desperate round of diplomacy was underway in Geneva. The stakes were incredibly high. Failure of talks could pave the way for military confrontation. As late as February 25, 2026, there was a glimmer of hope. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said a historic opportunity to secure a deal was within reach. On February 20th, President Trump issued a stark 10-day deadline for Iran. This ultimatum dramatically raised the pressure on negotiators in Geneva. When the third round of talks concluded without a breakthrough, the diplomatic window slammed shut. The world learned how final that failure was on February 28th, when the United States initiated a coordinated military assault. Israel initiated a coordinated military assault. The initial wave of strikes was extensive and strategically significant, targeting Iran's military infrastructure, targeting Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Huge explosions rocked multiple locations across the country. Tehran bore a significant brunt of the assault. Dark clouds of smoke billowed from the city's western side. Mehrabad International Airport was reportedly targeted. The attacks were not limited to military installations. They were a decapitation strike aimed at crippling Iran's command and control. The successful targeting of Supreme Leader Khamenei and his inner circle was a devastating blow, creating a massive power vacuum at the apex of the Iranian state. Iran's response to the devastating initial strikes was swift, massive, and meant to inflict significant pain across the region. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced a widespread campaign of retaliation. This was a major military operation: ballistic missiles and armed drone swarms. The primary target was Israel. Skies lit with incoming projectiles, Iron Dome intercepts, David's Sling intercepts. Many threats were neutralized, but some missiles broke through, striking military facilities and other locations. The counteroffensive extended beyond Israel. Tehran broadcast a stern warning to nations hosting U.S. forces. Any country offering basing or logistical support to U.S. operations would be a legitimate target. U.S. bases were put on maximum alert, personnel braced for attack. Skies became a tense chessboard: fighter patrols, surveillance drones, and anti-missile batteries. IRGC unleashed a wave of attacks. They said they targeted at least 27 U.S. bases: Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Israel. The assault showed Iran's reach and willingness to hit U.S. interests and allies simultaneously. Bases once safe were now front lines for U.S. soldiers and allies. The impact was immediate, with casualties reported across several nations. At least 11 killed in Israel, 6 U.S. soldiers killed, and 9 killed in Gulf states. Iran's president appeared on state TV to apologize to neighboring countries. "We have no intention of aggression toward neighboring countries," he said. The Middle East operates as a complex web of formal alliances, informal partnerships, deep-seated rivalries, and the outbreak of direct conflict immediately activated these connections. On one side stands Iran and its network of proxy forces, the Axis of Resistance, Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, militias in Syria, the Houthi movement in Yemen. These groups, armed and trained by Iran, give Tehran strategic depth and power projection across the region. On the other side is an informal alliance centered on the US, Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE united in opposition to Iran. The war sharpened these divisions, turning tensions into active battle lines. The economic impact of the war was not a future projection, but an immediate and harsh reality felt in financial markets across the world. The effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz acted as a seismic shock to the global energy sector. Oil prices, a barometer of geopolitical stability, surged instantly. Brent crude, the international benchmark, jumped by approximately 15% in the early days of the conflict, hovering at around $84 a barrel. This sharp increase reflected market fears of a prolonged supply disruption from one of the world's most vital production regions. For oil-importing nations, this translated directly into higher costs for transportation, manufacturing, consumers filling up their cars, creating inflationary pressures that threatened to slow economic growth on a global scale. While the spike in oil prices was significant, the effect on the liquefied natural gas market was even more dramatic and severe. Europe, in particular, which relies heavily on LNG imports, saw prices surge by as much as 50% in a single day. This was largely due to the announcement by state-run Qatar Energy that it was halting production and shipments. Qatar, one of the world's largest LNG exporters, ships nearly all of its supply through the Strait of Hormuz. The drone attacks blamed on Iran and the subsequent halt in production removed a massive quantity of gas from the global market, with very few alternative suppliers available to fill the void on short notice. As the conflict enters its second week, the world stands at a perilous crossroads, facing two starkly different and consequential paths forward. The first path is one of continued and potentially unrestrained escalation. This scenario involves an intensifying cycle of strikes and counterstrikes, with each side feeling compelled to respond to the other's actions with greater force. Such a trajectory could see the expansion of target sets to include more civilian infrastructure, leading to an even greater loss of life. It could also draw more countries into the fighting, through direct attacks on their territory, by activating mutual defense treaties. The introduction of more advanced and destructive weaponry, along with the sheer number of actors involved, creates a situation ripe for miscalculation, where a single mistake could trigger a chain reaction with catastrophic and irreversible consequences. The danger of miscalculation in this high-stakes environment cannot be overstated. With missiles in the air, drones patrolling the skies, and naval forces on high alert, the potential for an accidental engagement or a misinterpreted action is immense. The second path, while more difficult to navigate, offers the only hope of averting a larger catastrophe: a concerted and immediate push for de-escalation and diplomacy. This would require all parties to take a step back from the brink, cease offensive military operations, and reopen channels of communication, however strained. It would necessitate intense engagement from the international community, with neutral third-party nations and organizations like the United Nations stepping in to mediate, build trust, and facilitate negotiations. The immediate goals would be to secure a ceasefire, establish clear lines of communication to prevent accidental clashes, and ensure that humanitarian aid can reach the millions of civilians caught in the crossfire. This path requires immense political will and a recognition that a military victory may be impossible or come at an unacceptably high price. Ultimately, the choice between these two paths will be determined by the decisions made in the coming days and weeks. The rhetoric from all sides remains heated, and the desire for retribution runs deep. However, the staggering human and economic costs of the first week of fighting have laid bare the true stakes of the conflict. The critical question is whether the leaders involved can find the wisdom and courage to pivot from a military strategy to a diplomatic one. The conflict between Iran, Israel, and the United States is still unfolding, and the world is watching closely, because what happens next could shape global politics for years to come. The spiral of violence can be broken, but it requires courage, wisdom, and a commitment to the painstaking work of diplomacy. For the sake of the millions of lives hanging in the balance and the future of global stability, it is a commitment that must be made. The clear, calm, and deliberate pursuit of a diplomatic resolution is no longer just an option. It is an absolute necessity. Will this conflict escalate or calm down? One miscalculation could change everything. For millions of people living in the region, the hope is simple: that diplomacy will prevail before the situation spirals out of control. The world was no longer simply watching a standoff. It was witnessing the opening salvos of a war that threatened to engulf the entire Middle East and profoundly impact global stability for years to come.